When World War II ended in 1945, the world believed it was finally safe from the horrors unleashed by the Nazi regime. The concentration camps were liberated, the experiments were exposed, the symbols of the Third Reich were torn down, and justice, many thought, would follow. But history has a darker sense of humor. Because while the world watched war crimes trials and celebrated victory, something else was happening quietly, efficiently, and deliberately behind closed doors. Many of the minds responsible for the most dangerous Nazi experiments did not disappear. They were not imprisoned. They were not executed. They were recruited. What followed was one of the most disturbing chapters of modern history, a story of escaped justice, secret deals, erased pasts, and experiments that never truly ended. They simply changed flags. This is the story of the Nazi scientists who survived the war and continued their work in secret. The race for knowledge after the war. In 1945, Europe was in ruins. Cities lay in ashes. Millions were dead. But amid the devastation, something else became painfully clear. Germany had been far ahead in several areas of science and technology: advanced rocketry, jet propulsion, chemical engineering, human endurance research, medical experimentation that crossed every ethical boundary imaginable. The Allied powers understood one thing immediately: whoever controlled this knowledge would control the future. And so, while the public demanded justice, governments made calculations. Cold logic replaced moral outrage. The question was no longer, what crimes did these men commit? It became, what can they give us? Operation Paperclip, when criminals became assets. The United States wasted no time. Under a classified program later known as Operation Paperclip, American intelligence agencies identified, extracted, and protected German scientists, many of whom had direct ties to war crimes and human experimentation. Their Nazi affiliations were often minimized, rewritten, or erased entirely. Files were altered, backgrounds were cleaned, past atrocities were labeled as unconfirmed or irrelevant, and suddenly, men who should have been defendants at Nuremberg were instead boarding planes to America. They were given new lives, new laboratories, new funding, and, most importantly, immunity. Wernher von Braun, the face of a cleaned past. No name represents this better than Wernher von Braun. To the public, he became a hero, the father of modern rocketry, a visionary who helped put humans on the moon. To NASA, he was invaluable. But before he was an American icon, von Braun was an SS officer. His V-2 rockets, developed under his supervision, were built using forced labor from concentration camp prisoners. Thousands died from starvation, beatings, and executions in underground factories. Von Braun knew. He visited the sites, he saw the bodies. And yet, after the war, his Nazi past was quietly pushed aside. His genius outweighed his guilt. The message was clear. If your knowledge was useful enough, your crimes became negotiable. The doctors who never stopped experimenting. It wasn't just engineers. Nazi doctors who had conducted horrific medical experiments were also absorbed into post-war research programs, not only in the United States, but in the Soviet Union as well. These men had tested hypothermia by freezing prisoners alive. They had experimented with high-altitude pressure until lungs burst. They injected chemicals, pathogens, and toxins into unwilling subjects. After the war, many of them claimed their data was too valuable to lose. And disturbingly, governments agreed. Their findings were quietly incorporated into military medicine, aviation research, and chemical defense programs. The victims were forgotten. The data lived on. Human limits, experiments rebranded. One of the most disturbing continuations involved human endurance research. During the Nazi era, experiments pushed the human body past survivable limits: extreme cold, oxygen deprivation, dehydration, trauma. After the war, similar research appeared under new names: environmental physiology, aviation medicine, extreme survival training. The methods were refined, the language was sanitized, but the core question remained unchanged. How far can a human body be pushed before it breaks? Only now,
the experiments happened behind classified doors. The Soviet Union's shadow recruitment. While the United States ran Operation Paperclip, the Soviet Union conducted its own silent harvest of German scientists. Entire teams were forcibly relocated east. Unlike the Americans, the Soviets were less concerned with appearances. Former Nazi scientists were watched closely, controlled, and threatened, but still allowed to continue their research. Rocketry, chemical weapons, psychological warfare, all advanced rapidly. The Cold War demanded results. Ethics did not make the list. Psychological experiments and mind control. Some of the most dangerous Nazi research wasn't physical, it was psychological. Experiments on fear conditioning, sensory deprivation, trauma response, and obedience had been conducted inside camps and prisons. After the war, these ideas resurfaced. In the West, they influenced covert programs focused on interrogation, brainwashing, and behavior control. The concept of breaking the human will, perfected under tyranny, became a tool of intelligence agencies. Different uniforms, same objectives. Why justice was conveniently forgotten? So why were these men protected? The answer is uncomfortable but simple. Justice was slow. The Cold War was immediate. Governments feared that if they didn't take these scientists, their enemies would. Morality became a luxury. And so justice was postponed, indefinitely. The cost of stolen knowledge. But stolen knowledge comes with a price. By accepting the results of unethical experiments, post-war governments legitimized them. They sent a message into history that atrocities can be forgiven if they produce results, that suffering can be justified if it advances power, that some lives matter less if others benefit. This wasn't just a betrayal of victims, it was a blueprint. The experiments that never ended. Decades later, classified documents began to surface. Redacted reports, declassified memos, whispers from former insiders. They revealed a chilling truth. Many Nazi-era ideas never disappeared. They were refined, repackaged, continued. The war didn't end the experiments. It globalized them. The moral reckoning that never came. Decades later, some of these scientists lived long lives. They died peacefully, honored, decorated, celebrated. Their victims never received justice. No apologies, no acknowledgement. History moved on, but the stain remained. Final reflection. When we talk about forbidden experiments and dangerous science, we often imagine them as relics of a barbaric past. But the truth is far more unsettling. They didn't end. They evolved.
After the war, the world wanted closure. It wanted clean endings, clear villains, and comforting resolutions. But history rarely provides that luxury. Instead of a full reckoning, what emerged was a quiet transition, one that allowed dangerous ideas to survive under new management. The laboratories were no longer marked with Nazi symbols. The uniforms were different, the flags had changed. But inside those rooms, the same questions were being asked. How much pain can the human body endure? How long can the mind be pushed before it collapses? What happens when fear becomes a tool instead of a consequence? These questions did not belong to the past, they became central to the future. In the years following World War II, secrecy became the new battlefield. Governments realized that information itself was a weapon, and some of the most valuable information came from places no one wanted to talk about openly. Data obtained through suffering, knowledge extracted through coercion, results written in blood. Publicly, nations condemned Nazi crimes. Privately, they studied the results. What made this transition especially disturbing was how easily it happened. There were no dramatic announcements, no moral debates broadcast to the public. Decisions were made in classified meetings, justified by urgency and fear. The enemy was always just one step away from gaining an advantage. And so, step by step, the line moved. Experiments that would have been unthinkable in peacetime became acceptable under the label of national security. Ethical review boards existed, but their authority stopped where secrecy began. When a project was classified, scrutiny vanished. The Cold War intensified this dynamic. The threat was no longer theoretical. Nuclear weapons, long-range missiles, and psychological warfare redefined what survival meant. Governments believed they were preparing for the worst, and preparation justified extremes. Research into sensory deprivation expanded rapidly. Isolation chambers, prolonged darkness, silence so complete it disoriented the mind. These methods were studied not to heal, but to observe how long a person could maintain identity without external input. Fear conditioning followed a similar path. By manipulating stress, uncertainty, and perceived control, researchers sought to map the breaking point of human resistance. The goal was not chaos, it was predictability. If the mind could be broken reliably, it could be controlled. These ideas echoed experiments once conducted behind barbed wire and concrete walls. The victims had changed, the justification had not. Another area that quietly advanced was chemical and biological research. During the war, Nazi scientists had tested compounds on prisoners with little regard for survival. After the war, research into incapacitating agents, nerve responses, and behavioral effects continued under military supervision. The language became clinical, subjects became volunteers or personnel. Outcomes were measured in efficiency, not morality. Failures were buried, successes were classified. What makes this history especially unsettling is not just what happened, but what was normalized. The concept that extreme circumstances allow extreme actions became embedded into institutional thinking. Once accepted, it was rarely questioned. And then there were the files. Decades later, when fragments of classified archives were released, they painted a picture that was incomplete but deeply troubling. Pages were missing, names were redacted, entire sections were blacked out, but patterns remained visible. Programs appeared, disappeared, and reappeared under different names. Research lines were abandoned publicly, only to continue privately. Oversight mechanisms existed on paper, but not in practice. The truth was never meant to be fully known. Some insiders later described an unspoken understanding that certain knowledge was too dangerous to acknowledge publicly, but too valuable to destroy. That admitting its origins would force uncomfortable questions no one wanted to answer. So silence became policy. This silence extended to the victims. The people whose suffering had produced foundational data were erased from the narrative. Their names were never recorded, their experiences reduced to numbers and charts. History moved forward without them. Meanwhile, the scientists responsible for this knowledge adapted. Some reinvented themselves as respected academics, others worked quietly behind government contracts. Their expertise remained in demand, their pasts inconvenient. They were not monsters in secret layers, they were professionals in offices. Engineers, doctors, analysts. The banality of their presence made their legacy even harder to confront. And perhaps that is the most dangerous lesson of all. Evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it wears credentials. Sometimes it speaks calmly. Sometimes it claims necessity. As the decades passed, technology advanced faster than ethics could keep up. Surveillance expanded. Psychological profiling became more precise. Behavioral prediction moved from theory to application. The idea of understanding and influencing human behavior at scale no longer belonged to science fiction. And buried within that progress were echoes of questions first asked in places history would rather forget. How much control is too much? How much knowledge is worth the cost? And who decides where the line is drawn? These questions remain unanswered. Because the legacy of those experiments is not just historical. It lives in the frameworks we still use, in the assumptions we still make, in the belief that some truths are worth any price. The war ended, the camps were dismantled, the symbols were destroyed, but the mindset survived. And as long as power values results over humanity, that mindset will always find a place to hide. This is not a story about the past. It is a warning about